I took this off of the website of Lamandry and Jonah, so I'm going to read a little bit of Robert's background here. Robert E. Weisenberger, am I saying it right, Weisenberger? Is a civil litigator who has successfully represented clients in numerous civil actions from inception through resolution, including at trial. Prior to joining Lamandry and Jonah in 2021, Mr. Weisenberger worked for White and Bright. Sounds like a dental firm, actually. White and Bright. I like it. Primarily on commercial and real estate litigation, including handling complex commercial, fraud, and contract disputes. Mr. Weisenberger also has experience in a broad range of other practice areas, including personal injury, medical malpractice, construction defect, and insurance bad faith litigation, among others. Mr. Weisenberger is expanding his practice at Lamandry and Jonah LLP to include constitutional litigation. He's got some great role models there, I would say. So, during law school, Mr. Weisenberger had the honor of clerking as extern. Is that right? Extern? For the Honorable William V. Gallo, Magistrate Judge for the United States District Court of the Southern District of California, and the Honorable Margaret M. Mann, Chief Judge for the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of California. He also worked as a law clerk practicing in the areas of insurance, defense, intellectual property, and federal appeals. So he's got quite a background, and his educational background is even more impressive. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, first of all, where you're from originally, and what made you want to get into the practice of law?
Yeah, thanks, Perry, and thanks, Boris, for having me come and give a presentation to you all. It wasn't as I was dancing at the wedding, I didn't realize that was going to lead to me being here, sitting up in front of all of you, giving this presentation. But God works in mysterious ways, and so here I am. And when Boris asked, I was like, well, sure, why not? Ask, you say yes. So don't necessarily feel qualified to be here talking to all of you. I'm still pretty young, lacking in a lot of life wisdom and experience, but I will share what I have to offer today. And tomorrow's Pentecost Sunday. This is going to be a lot of Holy Spirit-led discussion, hopefully this morning. And it's good to be here, and it's good to see you all and be able to speak to you and share some of my life. So, where am I from? I grew up in Ohio, on about 80 acres south of kind of northwest Ohio, south of Toledo. If you know where Detroit is, it's about hour and a half south of Detroit, which is Michigan. And so I grew up on a farm. We weren't farmers, but I grew up in the middle of farm country. My dad was actually a dentist, and my wife my mother was a medical doctor who practiced family medicine for a few years before she stopped to be basically a full-time homeschool mom at home. She didn't start out homeschooling, but she stopped. I think when I was 3 or 4 or 5 maybe, I went out and I was praying like to the Blessed Mother that Mommy would stay home. We had like a statue out in the front yard, and so I would go down there, I would kneel, and I would say Hail Mary, and I would pray that Mommy would stay home. And that was kind of like, she kind of been feeling this tension between work and kind of these 3 children that she now had, and should she keep doing it and all this. And that was kind of my understanding from what stories told when I was younger, is that was kind of the deal breaker for her. She was like, okay, I'm gonna stay home. And she kept her license my whole life, but she didn't practice after that. So she stayed at home. She was a full-time mom, even though she had gone to medical school, started a medical career. So that was, she made a sacrifice there that I know she doesn't regret. And she's very happy that she did. So I grew up in Ohio on this farm. Again, we weren't farmers, but I learned how to do manual labor. We did a lot of maintenance, a lot of upkeep, a lot of things like that. Now, I would say I'm from the Midwest, met my wife and told her where I was from, she told me that I was from the East Coast, because if you're from California, anything east of basically Colorado is the East Coast to her. So I learned that I'm from the East Coast when I got out here. But so that's kind of the beginning. Yeah.
We have to do the pass the baton every once in a while. So and which is good, because then I can't interrupt you in the mid sentence. So it sounds like you had some great role models growing up. Your parents, of course. What about your brothers and sisters? Or tell me about that part of your family.
Sure, yeah. So I was the oldest of six. I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and we were all pretty close together. My youngest brother is 11, a little more than 11 years younger than me. So 6, I think my second brother was 18 months younger than me, and then they kind of spaced out a little bit more, every child after that. But so we grew up together. We had, I was the oldest, so I was the role model, I guess, from in terms of as siblings go, and I could have done better, but there was some things I did well and some things that I could have done better for sure. So.
Isn't that life? Basically, I could have done that better. I wish I would have. Yeah, that's kind of the way it goes. So, what about the growing up years? It sounds like you had a good faith basis right from the get-go. Did you attend Mass pretty regularly with your parents, and how did that go?
Yeah, so I definitely did. I was, as cradle Catholic as it gets, basically. I was, my parents were both Catholic, and they both came from Catholic families. I think my dad was one of 5. My mom, I think, was also one of 5. There's some faith journeys with both of their parents, and getting more into the faith and things like that. But my parents definitely, I think, gave me everything that they had. They did better than their parents, and I hope I can do better than my parents did. And they were very good examples of being dedicated to prayer. So they both prayed every day. I mean, there was no question about it. And they also were regular, daily Mass communicants for the most part. So for most of my life, they went to daily Mass. Either both of them, there were kind of phases at certain times, but for the most part, they both went to Mass daily. And we went to Mass with them most of the time, especially when we were younger. I would go with my mom. So we had, wasn't a question of did we miss Sunday Mass. That was a given, right? We never missed Sunday Mass, but we went to Mass quite frequently. So yeah, we had definitely some good role models in that regard, and yeah.
Well, tell me, you probably had a great upbringing. It sounds like almost idyllic. Were there any little drawbacks? For example, when you went off to college, did you kind of like, was there a sort of a rethinking of some of that stuff? Or did it give you such a firm basis that how did you handle that? When you go to school, there are all these crazy ideas floating around, and were you susceptible to that in any way?
Yeah. So, the thing is, my parents kind of cheated because they sent me to the University of Dallas, so there weren't really crazy ideas floating around there. But so I did grow up in a great environment, a great home life. But there were things that that could have been better. And one of them, I think, was a dedicated family prayer time every day. We did go to Mass almost every day, but we didn't have a time of our day that, I would say the evening is really the ideal opportunity for this, but where as a family we would gather every single day, no matter what, whether we went to Mass, whether or not, and prayed together. And I think that was something that if, that could have been, so that's one thing that when I kind of reflect back, I'm like, I think that's something. And so that's something I try to do with my family. We pray the Rosary every single night, without exception, that's something that my wife and I have. I'll tell you more about kind of how we got to that point, but later in this, but that was something. And so, and there were still, even though I had this great, I learned the faith intellectually in a very kind of thorough and profound way, and I learned a lot implicitly from my parents, from their own prayer lives and watching them pray. Right, there was still some worldliness in our home. There was still a lot of my own attachment to kind of worldliness, and there was this back and forth. I knew that the faith was something that I needed. I knew that I wanted to go to heaven. I knew that I needed to, be connected to the church. I knew I needed to go to confession. I knew I needed to work on these things and try to build virtue. But there was this kind of back and forth, even as a child, and through my young adult life, of kind of trying and failing and trying and failing, and not really having the impetus or the enough kind of drive to actually kind of break with the temptations of the world, so to speak. So then in college, again, like I said, my parents cheated. They sent me to University of Dallas. Well, I mean, my dad, what he did was he said, basically, he gave me a book called, I think it was the college guide. It was a college guide for conservatives and old-fashioned liberals or something like that. And he said, let's look at some of these here. Read this book. And so I did, and we picked out some 5 or 6 Catholic schools in the book, and we visited different ones. And I liked University of Dallas the most when I visited there, and so that's where I went. And he helped financially with paying for my college, and so that was a choice to make. And quite frankly, I didn't have a desire to go to a different school. I think I was interested in a school where I would be able to have an environment that would allow me to grow, in my understanding of faith and the world and society and all of that. And so I was very happy to go there. And University of Dallas was, like I said, where I ended up. So.
Kind of a question that comes up in my mind is, my daughter went to USD. We thought we were sending her to a Catholic college. And as it turned out, it was, there's some ideas floating around there that were pretty objectionable, to say the least. You didn't find any of that at Dallas? Maybe a little bit here and there. And what are your thoughts on the state of Catholic colleges these days? It's kind of an off track, but what do you think?
Sure. Yeah. So, in terms of the academic, the teachers there and the academic program that they have there, I mean, it's just rock solid. You can't go wrong. And the first 2 years of the program is mandatory for everybody. So whether you're a science major or an English major or whatever it might be, everybody's the same first 2 years, and you get a really solid basis in Western culture and tradition and theology, philosophy. You study all the subjects, and so and then when I studied philosophy, that was my 4-year degree. And I have nothing but positive things to say about every teacher in the philosophy department that I had. I mean, it was just outstanding, and it formed me in an incredible way, in my understanding. And they teach real philosophy there. So there's a lot of schools will teach something called symbolic logic, which they call philosophy, but it's really just kind of linguistic, studying how language works, and it's not actually studying thought and ideas and how that progression basically from the Greeks through to the current present day. So now that being said, it's a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds, and there's not perfection among the student body. It's not a monastery. There's some mixed things there, of course, at least when I was there, and it's been a few years now, over 10 years, so 15 years actually. So, but there was opportunities for good and opportunities for bad. There was opportunities to kind of to stay attached to worldly things, but I still, even with the mix that's there, is a lot different from what I think you would see at a lot of other schools. Maybe not USD, I don't know, but certainly at public universities, big public universities. I mean, the bad that you might see there isn't going to be what you will see at a lot of other places. I've heard stories of actually the current president of University of Dallas told a story about what he saw when he went to one of his schools, and I was like, well, yeah, that would definitely never happen at the University of Dallas. I mean, anyway, so there's still so through college, the state of Catholic colleges. Yeah, I mean, there's not very many good ones. I mean, that would be my opinion. I mean, there is all the ones that I visited, I think were very good, and they all had good programs. I visited the University of Dallas. I visited Thomas Aquinas College up in here in California. I visited Belmont Abbey College in North Carolina. I visited St. Vincent's College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and then I visit. Okay, yeah, wow, yeah, and then I visited Hillsdale, which is not a Catholic school, but it is an outstanding program that it's a very good school, and I had a brother that went there, and actually he I think had the earliest kind of faith, kind of strongest faith from an early age, and can maybe. So, anyways, he went there and he absolutely loved it. And I also had a brother that went to St. Vincent's, although he's the only one of the 6 kids who's not actually practicing his faith. But I don't think that's St. Vincent's fault. He was kind of on his own path before that. So, anyways, yeah.
Yeah, you stole my question. I was wondering if all your siblings have maintained the faith. So don't give up. I'm sure that there's hope for your brother with that background. He'll probably come full circle.
Yeah, I can elaborate a little bit more. So yeah, all of my siblings, like I said, except for one, are practicing Catholics and very faithful. I think my youngest brother has the deepest spiritual life maybe of all of us. My brother, the one who's not following the faith, I certainly have great hope that he'll come back. And I don't know if some of you probably saw Father Sebastian's talk, but that was a month ago or so. But I thought that was very encouraging, the talk that he gave, and the stories especially that he told towards the end about the conversion, like basically the deathbed or last minute conversions of these people. You pray for them, and God holds all the cards. He holds the keys of life and death, and he holds the grace, and he can, we might have to wait, but if we pray, we really can trust that he will bring people around. So, yeah.
Nicely said. So, I mean, your story is almost too good to be true. I mean, you hear about guys that they have these big dips in their life where, they might have fallen away a little bit, or at least encountered situations that really tested their faith. And don't you think that maybe those are thrown in our paths just to, shake us up and really help us to affirm what's really important? Did you have any events that occurred during those college years or beyond that made you question, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah, the most significant thing I think that happened to me in college was I met my wife. All right, so that definitely shook me up in a certain way, right? Not maybe in the way that you're thinking of, but that's what really challenged me to kind of start to put behind me my worldly attachments, I guess you might say. And it confronted me with my own sinfulness, right? And my own weakness, and it gave me the kind of strength. So, again, I had this really good kind of intellectual formation, but there was still not, and I had constant exposure to the faith, right? I should have been, by that point, I should have been in my life, much more than I was, right? Given all that God had given to me, all the grace that He had poured out on me through my family, and the kind of the closeness to the faith. But again, when you're struggling with kind of habitual sin and just this kind of these attachments, and you're just never making forward progress, your spiritual life kind of stays in a stagnant place. It doesn't really you don't really grow close to the Lord. You don't really trust Him as you should. And so, I had kind of known that I would want to. I believed that getting married was going to be my path. My path to becoming holy and to getting to heaven. I really couldn't see any other way that it would happen. And so I was definitely looking to get married, right? And I was looking for that, and that was something that was in my, kind of the most important thing that I was looking for, right? And I kind of knew, I think, that was going to be the thing that got me to really start to advance, in my spiritual life, and start to put away and put aside my selfishness, right? I mean, that is what marriage does, and that's what it's supposed to do. I didn't have a full concept of just how profound that would be, and how much I would be confronted with my own selfishness through the sacrament of marriage, and through working, meeting my wife and stuff. But anyways, that was, I would say, a big turning point for me, where I was like, okay, I want to have a good relationship with her, and I want us to have a holy marriage. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to grow in my relationship with God, and have to actually put behind me, these attachments. And so that was the start of kind of a long journey.
I don't know if you guys remember a movie with Jack Nicholson. And one of the lines that I don't remember the name of the movie. He was supposedly an astronaut or something. He had a relationship with this lady, and it was an antagonistic kind of relationship. But the line was, "You make me want to be a better man," and I've used that a few times on my wife, and she's not buying it. Well, let's change gears a little bit here. You made it through college. You met Haley, and I don't know, love at first sight or whatever. And what then made you decide to go to law school?
Sure. So law school was definitely was on the radar, well before I got to college. Actually, I had, even in high school and kind of earlier, I had thought about getting married, and that would probably be my vocation and my path. And in order to get married and have a family, you have to provide for the family, and you have to be able to support them. And so that was, it was, in my 16, 17, 18-year-old world, that was really the only way that I could see that happening. And there obviously could have been other ways that I did that, but I had good skills in the area. I had strong skills that would support a legal career. Even at that age, it was kind of clear that would be something that I could do well. And I also I liked philosophy, and I wanted to study philosophy in school, and I knew that philosophy would be a good setup for law school, so to speak. So it kind of allowed me to put off the decision for another 4 years and do something that I really liked and that I really wanted to do. And so, yeah, so that was really the motivation for it, was really because I was going to probably support a family at some point. It wasn't like, and I had some role models in that area too. My grandfather was an attorney. I had a great uncle that was an attorney, some other family members that were lawyers. So there's not, it was in the family, something that was somewhat familiar to me. Again, both of my parents were in the healthcare side of things, but that for whatever reason, that wasn't as interesting to me at the time. And so I ended up going that direction. And then, so that was kind of where the impetus for law school came from. And then in school, that just kind of continued. There wasn't, that was kind of my plan, and I met my wife, and so that kind of solidified the plan that this is what I need to do. And so I prepared for that, took the the test that you need to do, and applied to law schools, and yeah.
I understand you scored really well on the LSAT, and you're a great student. I got to find something that's problematic here. I'm not finding it. Controversial, that kind of thing. Speaking of controversy, it seems like being an attorney involves head-to-head competition, great debating skills, that kind of thing. Were you a debate team kind of guy in college or high school?
Sure. So I was homeschooled, and I had 6 siblings, and my mother was Italian. So I think that's where the debating was kind of, I didn't need a debate team. I grew up in an environment of debate. If you didn't, you had to fend for yourself a little bit in my family, and if you didn't, then you got thrown under the bus. So yeah, but I mean, I did do like some theater, and when I was in grade school, that I really enjoyed. I got the lead role every time, the 2 times that I did it, and I did. And I liked to give presentations in college, and I loved music. I loved performing. I like that even more. But those skills kind of translate, other directions. So, I didn't. I mean, in law school, I did some things that were in that area, but I really didn't do like debate team or anything like that. But it was there. So yeah.
I got to tell a little story as an aside. It was one of the events that we had here at the parish. The Knights were putting it on. We had entertainment, and these guys were out here singing and so forth. I was in the kitchen, and I thought, well, they must have turned off the entertainment and taken a break and put on some music, that sounded like Johnny Cash. So I come out here, and this guy's singing Johnny Cash song, and it sounded just like him. So I got compliments, great voice. So you get into law school, you kind of go through the grind with that. I'm sure that's no picnic, but how did your faith inform your attitude then, and then how is it that it interweaves within the work that you're currently doing?
Yeah, sure. So in law school, my faith was starting to grow for sure, significantly more because, again, I had met my wife in college. We had met my junior year, her sophomore year. And so I was starting to kind of move closer to God, right? And so I spent a lot of time in prayer in law school, and I really looked at law school as it was a grind. It was a lot of work, and but it was kind of a let's get in and get out kind of thing. That was the main way I approached it. Was it wasn't philosophy. I didn't particularly care for most of the classes, except actually for my constitutional law classes. I actually really enjoyed the constitutional law classes. Again, I went to USD actually for law school, and the church there is just beautiful. So I did a lot of holy hours before classes in the morning, in the chapel there. Prayed the rosary a lot there, and so I was definitely more focused. I was focused on my relationship with Haley, my relationship with God, and then kind of doing well in law school for the purpose, again, of having a good job and being able to support a family. And the rosary is something that started to grow. I think if I had another big turn. So I met my wife, and then the second big kind of cracking point, I would say, would be the rosary. We didn't say a family rosary as a kid growing up. we did pray the rosary. You know, it was something that we did. I was familiar with it. But Haley wanted to pray the rosary together, and I was, I had this kind of resistance to it at first, but we did. And then eventually the tables kind of turned because she got me to say the rosary, but then I became so devoted to the rosary that I wanted her to pray more, and she was resisting, right? Later, so it kind of, so the rosary was starting to become a very deep part of my spiritual life, and it was almost my spiritual life at this point. I would pray the whole rosary, all the decades, all the mysteries, every day, and that was kind of what I latched onto, was the rosary, and for good reason, because it's a very powerful prayer, and it was really it was the only thing that was capable of kind of separating me from the attachments that I had. I feel like, and so, yeah. So the rosary started coming in. I did do a lot of holy hours, a lot of time in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and I worked hard in law school, but I didn't make it more important than everything else I was doing. I didn't become more important than my relationship with my wife, and it didn't become more important than my prayer life. And so, it had kind of an important place, but it had its place in my life at the time.
And were you married prior to law school? So you waited until after?
Well, okay, yeah, we got married at the end of my second year of law school. So while I was in law school, we got married. So we were preparing for getting married and doing all that, and then, yeah, jumped right in before. But I got. Well, I'll wait for those stories.
Yeah, I mean, it almost seems like putting the cart before the horse a little bit. I'm sure financially it must have been a challenge. Love conquers all, so obviously worked out. I guess one of the questions that I would have is, well, first of all, a comment. With all that prayer, I can kind of understand why you did so well in law school, and even earlier than that. And then, as far as getting your first job out of law school, what was it that attracted you to the firm, or that you were with originally, and the type of work that you did? Don't take this wrong, but I read that and it's sort of like, well, that doesn't sound very interesting to me. It sounds kind of mundane in a sort of way. Well, exactly. That's why I'm not a lawyer. But anyway, speak to that a little bit and how your faith informed your decision to go with that firm. And
sure. So kind of the decision-making matrix kind of continued to be the same, right? God was the most important thing. My wife and my family was next, and my work was subordinated to those things, and it was for the purpose of serving those things, right? And so I graduated law school. The first firm that I went to, it was a construction defect firm in Del Mar, and I basically chose it because it would support us enough, but it was actually the lowest paying job that I got. I had 3 offers right away, and I took the lowest paying one that was closest to where we lived. So the least amount of commuting time, least amount of money, but also more flexibility, in terms of family time. So that was kind of a unique decision. Most people don't necessarily make that decision, but I definitely did that, in part because it was a little bit mundane, and I feel like that was God in a certain way, giving me an easy reason not to be like super ambitious, kind of in a worldly way, in that way. So it was, and I didn't, find a lot of particular meaning in my work, except that it served the purpose of supporting our family and allowing that kind of vision to start to grow. And at the time in my life, if I was there now, if I was at this place in my spiritual life where I am now, then I would have been probably much more patient and much kind of happier in the situation that I was. But God was working on me, and I was continuing to grow, and it was very much a struggle in terms of what I was doing on a daily basis. But life is a test. It is a sacrifice. I mean, that's what God basically designed this life to be, a test, and so we have to sacrifice ourselves. We have to die to ourselves. We have to give these things up. And it was actually those first 5 years or so, especially, was a very difficult time, because I was spending most of my time every day doing things that were in a certain way mundane. I mean, there was satisfaction in kind of helping people resolve their disputes and, kind of bringing justice to certain situations. And there was a lot of goodness in that, but there was still kind of definitely a mundane aspect. It was, but I mean, there's a lot of work that can have that aspect to it, right? But God sanctifies it and He makes it holy. And so, as we go in our spiritual life, I think we start to find we start to see the beauty of the mundane, the beauty of doing the dishes, and of doing the chores and the work and the things that aren't so glamorous. That's where the battle is won. That's where our salvation is made, is in those moments and in doing those types of things for the glory of God, right?
That's beautiful. There's a little book called by a guy named Brother Lawrence, and the title is Practicing the Presence. Do you feel that by practicing the presence of God, you've been led maybe to that first firm that wasn't the huge, high-paying, glamorous type work, but it was a training ground that He led you into to prepare you for maybe what you're doing now and what's going in the future?
Yeah, I definitely see God's hand in that first job that I had, for sure. I actually, so they were mostly a construction defect firm, but they actually had like 4 medical malpractice cases that I was working on, all of them. And one of them actually went to trial. And here I am, a first-year attorney, and I actually was like third chair at the trial, and I was examining, witnesses and doing cross exams and things my first year out of law school. So I got some very early experience that's very, very unusual for that, for somebody that inexperienced. And they had me do it because the firm I was working with, they weren't, the attorneys who were trying the case weren't that great, to be perfectly honest. And so the issues that I was handling, I knew the best, even as a first year attorney, and so I did those. But those cases were actually the most interesting ones to me. And now, 10 years later, now I'm working on some medical malpractice cases that are pretty heavy, that involve children who have been victims of the transgender movement. And so I've got a handful of these cases, and I've been working on these, and and my ability to kind of jump in and work on these cases and the interest that I had in them is partially because I had quite a bit of experience actually with working with these kinds of cases at that first firm. And so, and there's other things too, but when I look back, I see God's hand, right, kind of laying the foundation for things that are going to come later, for sure.
Well, it looks like you do a lot of reading. Would you like to tell us a little bit about some of these influences that you've brought with you today?
Sure. So I didn't really think that I did a lot of reading until I actually started preparing for the talk today. And I kind of felt like I didn't read a lot in part because when I was, working as an attorney, I'm reading all day, I'm looking at the screen all day, I'm researching things, I'm writing things, and I feel like I felt like I read a lot more as a kid and in college and all that stuff, and that once I kind of started law school and my career, that I just didn't have time to read, mostly because it's just too blurry-eyed by the end of the day, right? It was like, I can't pick up another book and start reading some more. And so I feel like I didn't read. But when I look back at all the books that I did end up reading, I actually have read, but in small parts, right? And, I kind of have realized that even though it wasn't really a super conscious effort by me, I feel like the Holy Spirit's kind of always been prompting me, like, to read 10 to 15 minutes here and there, read 10 to 15 minutes here and there, read 10 to 15 minutes here and there, and do that on a regular basis. And when I kind of look back, I'm like, well, actually doing that, I've read a lot of books and probably absorbed a lot more and learned a lot more and gained a lot more spiritual kind of understanding than if I had read them kind of, from front to cover kind of in a week or in 2 weeks or a month or whatever, that kind of. So, yeah, so each of these books that I brought and some of the holy cards and stuff are things that were a big part of my spiritual journey, starting kind of really in law school. And the first one, and I can maybe pass some of these around, is the you pass these around if you want them. These are just the Sacred Heart cards, and some of you probably have them already. But this card to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, had definitely a profound impact on my life. We were actually, I think I actually picked up this card, and I have the original one here in my Bible. But we were I think I was in law school still, and my wife has like an art. She's an artist, and she does like an art company called the Eternal Artisan Company. And we were at although I don't think it was named that at that point, we went to a Catholic Answers conference, and one of the booths was, I think, the Miles Christi priests, which the order is now being suppressed, but they're a wonderful group of priests. And I took one of these cards, and I was reading, the back of it, and, kind of think, right, well, homeschooled Catholic, cradle Catholic, you should know about the Sacred Heart. Well, I knew about the Sacred Heart, but, it never had profoundly kind of impacted me, and it wasn't I didn't have a devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And kind of getting this card was really the first step to that devotion for me. And I read this, and I was like, well, these are all the things I want. It says, the first promise is that I will give them all the graces necessary for their state in life. Okay, well, that one seemed kind of vague to me, but nevertheless, it sounds good, right? I will establish peace in their families. Well, that's something I certainly was very, hopeful to have in our family. I will console them in all their afflictions. Wow. That's a powerful one, right? Because I was afflicted at this time. There were a lot of ways in which, I'm overcoming my own selfishness, struggling with kind of mundane work. And, on the outside, you wouldn't see somebody who's suffering, but on the inside, it was. There was a lot of struggle that was happening. I also had a lot of physical issues that were kind of afflicting me at the time, too. Again, not stuff that you would notice just looking at me, but, there was some serious struggle that was going on, right? So console them in their afflictions. I'll be their refuge during life, and especially at the hour of death. I will pour abundant blessings on all their undertakings. This one was a big one for me at the time because, right, I'm in law school, and I'm going to need to study for the bar exam, need to take the bar exam, need to start my career, and we're starting this family. So having kind of this promise of the Sacred Heart that he will bless their undertakings. I mean, this is the undertaking of my life here, right? And so here is the Sacred Heart presenting himself to me, and offering this grace, right? As I'm kind of reading this is what I'm realizing. And so I took the card, right, and I started to pray to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and really just a really kind of simple type of prayer, just like, I honor you, Sacred Heart of Jesus, I love you, and it can be that simple, but to do that every day before a statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus can be very, very powerful. And I had this card, and I would pray when I was studying for the bar exam, to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And then I had the card with me in the hotel room when I'm taking the bar, when I'm about to go and take the bar exam, I'm kneeling down and I'm praying to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and I say, well, I entrust my legal career to you, right? To the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And of course it went well. And I've given that advice to a couple of other people now, and it's gone well for them as well. And some people who didn't pass the bar the first few times. So, he sanctifies our work, the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So that's one thing. And then, there were other things in my private in my own internal struggle. It says, tepid soul. Oh, sinners shall find in my heart the source and infinite ocean of mercy. Well, that was me, right, at the time. That was me. And so I was finding in his heart the source and infinite ocean of mercy. And then there's kind of hope, right? Because the next two, they kind of build on each other, right? So it starts with sinners. Then it says, tepid soul shall become fervent. That was also me, right? Tepid, trying to be fervent, trying to pray, but really not having that zeal or that fire yet. And then it says, fervent souls shall speedily rise to perfection. So you can kind of see like this progression here where it starts with sinners and tepid souls. It doesn't say that you will progress quickly at that point. But once you become fervent, I don't know when that happens, but at some point you become a fervent soul and you speedily rise to great perfection. So then, that kind of, it's a quick path, right, to becoming holy and to becoming saintly, saint with a small s, which is what we're all supposed to be doing. And then it says, I will bless the homes in which the image of my Sacred Heart shall be exposed and honored. So that this part of it is, I think, the most important, especially for families. You need to have a statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus somewhere in a prominent place in your home that, and then you kind of express this devotion through that, having that statue there, right? So we have one in our living room, and every time I, go to bed at night, I close the door, lock the door, turn off the lights, and I walk past the statue and I stop and I, just say some very simple prayers of devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. I love you, Sacred Heart of Jesus. Bless our home. Things like that. And it's just a few minutes, or not even. Sometimes it's 20, 30 seconds. But I feel like it's just something that you can't go wrong with. And quite frankly, it's something we need to do. All of us need to do. I don't know where I wouldn't be where I am. I wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't be at peace in my life if I hadn't found this devotion, right, when I did. And if I had found it sooner, I probably would have had peace much, much sooner. And then, well, see, I'm getting points on number 11 right now. Those who propagate this devotion shall have their names written in my heart, never to be effaced, right? So encouraging people in the Sacred Heart of Jesus devotion, you kind of, it's a really good one, right? That one I was like, oh wow, that's profound, right? Never to be effaced. So I'm hopeful in that promise. And then the last one, this is a really, really, really good one. And if you haven't done this yet, actually kind of curious how many people have and how many people haven't. But if you haven't done it yet, you got to try. And then if you try and fail, you need to ask him to give you the grace to succeed. Okay, number 12 is, I promise in the excessive mercy of my heart that its all-powerful love will grant to all who shall receive communion on the first Friday of the month for 9 consecutive months the grace of final repentance. They shall not die in my displeasure, nor without receiving the sacraments, and my divine heart shall be their safe refuge at that last hour. So, I mean, that's our goal, right? I mean, that's a promise. That's the promise that he gave to the good thief on the cross, right? You shall be with me in paradise. I mean, and all we have to do is go to Mass 9 times and receive communion on the first Friday. So our soul has to be in a state of grace, obviously, to receive communion, right? And so we have to be in a state of grace. So, anyways, I'm just kind of curious. Show of hands, how many people have actually done that 9 First Fridays? Okay, so there's a few, and some haven't. But anyways, it's a very beautiful devotion. I encourage you to try, because the reason I say try, and then if you fail, ask God for the grace to do it, is because I tried 3 times, and the first 2 times I was unsuccessful. There's always something that came up on one of those. You have to do 9 consecutive First Fridays. There's always something that came up somewhere in between. It might have been a court hearing. It might have been this, that. It's just always something. And so I tried 2 times and failed. And I was praying, like, grant me this grace, help me to do this, right? And so the 3rd time I tried, I was getting close to having completed it. And I realized, like, around Christmas, this was like the beginning of Advent, we had like a trip planned to Utah to do some skiing with the kids. And I realized that we were going to be gone out of town for the first Friday. And this was like, it was like the 7th or 8th, I was getting close to having it completed, right? And so I had to figure out a way that this was going to work and how this would happen, right? And so we were going to Bryan Head. There's no Catholic churches in Bryan Head. The closest one is like 2 hours away. So our last day was First Friday, okay? And so we left. Basically what I had to do was get everybody up at about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, get out of the the condo, and drive out. And it's ice and snow, and it's Bryan Head. In January it's like 15 degrees out, and we're bundling up kids and putting them in the car and putting them in their car seats, and getting all the stuff and be packing it up and getting down. That itself was just a miracle, right? For miracle number 1. And then we made it. So there was a mass that was like an 8 o'clock mass somewhere 2 hours away, and it was on our way home, and it worked out really well because we ended up getting home at a good hour, and everybody was happy. And but anyways, it took us this sacrifice at this moment, right, to make that happen. But it was, God's grace. I could have very easily just been like, I'll just try again next time, or something like that. So anyways, it's a very powerful devotion, and I can't, the words cannot express how powerful this devotion is. So I encourage you to pursue it. Yeah, I don't remember where we were before that, but.
Thank you for bringing that. That's powerful, as you say. Tell us about some of the main influences besides the Sacred Heart of Jesus. You started you were one of the co-founders of the Padre Pio group here at the church. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I can get to that too. But yeah, I will share a couple other things. Let's see here. So when we were, actually, how much time do we have? Maybe I don't want to. 4 minutes? Is that all we got? Okay. All right. So yeah, it is almost 10. Okay. So I'll just share another really powerful devotion that is start with that, and then I'll talk about the Padre Pio group. So the devotion to the 7 Sorrows of Our Lady. I don't know if anybody has heard of the 7 Sorrows of Our Lady. Anybody? Show of hands. Okay, there's a few. So the first time I learned about the Sorrows of Our Lady was actually Aemilia Christi retreat when I was 18. I went on a silent retreat in Michigan area, and we prayed the Sorrows of Our Lady. I didn't bring it I didn't do anything with it after that, but I remembered it for some reason. It kind of stuck in my head. And when we were our first year of marriage, my wife she read this book, The Eternal Galilean, by Fulton Sheen. And I read a lot of it too. And in the back, the last section of the book is basically is his reflections on Our Lady of Sorrows. And that had a profound impact on my wife. It had a profound impact on me. And I started saying the 7 Sorrows. I would say the rosary in the morning, in the middle of the day, and in the evening. And I replaced my middle rosary with just saying the 7 Sorrows of Our Lady. And I actually have some of these too that I can pass around. And you basically say, it's like a normal rosary, but it's with 7. You do 7 sets of 7. So you say the Our Father, you can do the creed and all that stuff at the beginning. You say the Our Father, you do 7 Hail Marys, Glory Be, Our Father, repeat, right? And there's 7 sorrows. And there's also some very powerful promises that go along with that, in addition to just the regular rosary. But anyway, so that's another thing that had a very profound impact. Now, the Padre Pio group. So, I haven't even talked about Padre Pio. So we're kind of like, we could probably spend 4 hours talking about like the most interesting part is really how all the ways that God has blessed me and my family in the last few years. But Padre Pio is another incredible figure that has loomed large in our lives, and from that came the desire to start the Padre Pio prayer group here. There was one down at Our Lady of the Rosary, which some of you may know about Our Lady of the Rosary. It's a beautiful parish down in Little Italy. If you've never been, go visit. It's got to be one of the prettiest churches in San Diego, besides maybe the Immaculata or some of those parishes. But the Padre Pio really helped my wife at a certain time in her life, and I was basically reading to her the stories of Padre Pio, which is another thing that I brought here. And so we had this devotion to Padre Pio, and my fourth daughter, Pia, is named after Padre Pio. She was blessed by Father Louis Solscha down at Our Lady of the Rosary with one of the gloves of Padre Pio. And so Padre Pio has really profoundly impacted my wife, both my wife and I. And so that's kind of where the desire and kind of the call to start a Padre Pio prayer group here came from. And so Daniel Cruz and I met with Father Anthony a few years ago and asked him about starting it. And he said, well, yes, but the bishop doesn't like a lot of the ideas that I come up with. And so, because you actually have to get approval from the bishop to start a Padre Pio prayer. They're an official thing that goes through the Vatican. And so to get one established, the bishop has to approve it. And so, but he approved this one. Father Anthony sent him a letter and he said yes. And so there we were. All right, it worked. And so we started the Padre Pio prayer group, and that kind of, it's kind of the prayer house for the men's group here, I feel like now in a certain way. And that's been a huge part of my prayer. I feel like, another really big thing is brotherhood, right? It's very important to have other men in your spiritual that you work with on a spiritual level to build up the kingdom. And so there's so much more I could say, but we'll end there.
Well, just a brief, I think we could take a couple of minutes and just look like some of the titles and things that have been an influence with you.
Okay, so this one is 33 Days to Morning Glory by Father Michael Gately. It's kind of like the baby version of Marian consecration. If you haven't done a Marian consecration, I highly, 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 highly recommend it. Start with it. It's very good. It kind of takes St. Louis de Montfort's spirituality and kind of dumbs it down and makes it very accessible and easy. And I read this book my first, it was early on. It was like our second year of marriage. And so the Marian devotion that I was having kind of crystallized, it kind of, really came together when I did this consecration. It solidified it. So I highly recommend that one. If you've done a Marian consecration, or you've already done this one, has anybody done the St. Louis de Montfort Marian consecration? Okay, so there's two. So if you want to take on, it's a thinner book, but it's a bigger lift. If you want to take on the more advanced one, the heavyweight, 33 days to Marian consecration, this is the one that you want to do. So I did this one first, and I didn't renew it, but you're supposed to renew your Marian consecration every year. And a good friend of ours, the Hogans, Bob Hogans and Jenny Hogan, gave me one of these a few years ago, and I did it, and I was like, oh wow, like that's really, it's digging deep, in terms of the Marian spirituality, and so I highly, highly recommend it. And I do it for Lent now, so I renew my Marian consecration doing this book every year during Lent, and it's been a couple years now, but I highly recommend that. And I actually have these are two extra copies, so if anybody wants to do one of those, you can take it. And then 33 Days to Merciful Love, another book by Father Michael Gately that I read shortly after doing 33 Days to Morning Glory. This was another big crack in the armor of worldliness. It kind of taught me to accept the sufferings that God has given me with a willingness, right? So we have these sufferings. If we're going to endure them, we might as well give them to God willingly, right? There's kind of, and also recognizing that they may only have a temporary period of time under which to offer them to God. Right now, I still wasn't really doing my own penances, but this kind of broke the camel's back and allowed me to at least start accepting the penances that God had already put on me, and to offer those to Him willingly. So that was a very significant thing. And then I was going to talk about family rosaries, but I'll do that another time because that could be a whole conversation. This was another really, I'll just share it just because it had a profound impact. And we have a child named Angelica after Mother Angelica, but this is a really good book about Mother Angelica. She's part of the reason we actually live where we live right now. My wife was kind of very sick, and she was reading that book, and she got a lot of inspiration and kind of got some prompting for us to kind of look around for places to live, even though it wasn't really something that was in the cards yet, but it worked out. And so that was another, there's stories that go along with that. Pray, hope, and don't worry. This is where Padre Pio, well, actually, it started with this card. Padre Pio, so Father Louis Solsha, also down from Our Lady of the Rosary, gave me this card in confession one time and said, here, pray, say this prayer. It's an efficacious novena to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. You're going to love it. And that's when I first learned about Padre Pio. And I kept this card, and I still have it, and that was 15 years ago. And it's very powerful to me. Padre Pio comes back into our lives with these books in a very profound way. My wife was, again, kind of sick, and I was reading these to her every night, and they gave her a lot of encouragement and strength. And we learned a lot about Padre Pio and just fell in love with him, basically. He's an incredibly charismatic saint who, he had the stigmata, he could bilocate, he just had this profound, deep spirituality that he was the face of Christ. He was Jesus incarnate, almost again. It's like the way that the degree of that his life mirrored Christ was just so profound that it's hard to imagine. And then this is volume 2. And these are all just stories. These aren't like biographies or anything. These are just Padre Pio stories. And all the people that have been impacted by him. So many miracles. There's like hundreds of miracles in these 2 books. And it's kind of like the gospel today where it says all the world cannot contain what, Christ did while he was here on earth. It's kind of like these 2 books are just, you get the sense that they're just scratching the surface of what Padre Pio did in terms of impacting people's spiritual lives and in terms of the miracles that he worked in people's lives. So anyways, those are some of the books. This here is just, I did bring a couple extra copies of these. Well, St. Louis de Montfort, there's a really great book called The Man Called Montfort. I have my 5th son is also named Louis, after St. Louis de Montfort, and Father Louis Solsha down from Our Lady of the Rosary. And he had a profound impact on my life in terms of fasting and other things like that. So that's a whole nother story, though. So I won't get into that either. This is just a book that Paul Jonah actually, that I'm finishing right now, and I bought a couple extra copies in case anybody wants to borrow one. But it's just really good to understand the Eucharist and where it comes from in the Jewish tradition. For example, has anybody ever heard of the bread of the presence? Okay, so it kind of talks about some of those Jewish roots of the Eucharist, and yes, it is. Yeah, so there's a lot of really cool stuff in there, but So, anyways, there.
Robert, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And I just want to commend you because the last couple of RCIA classes, they call it OCIA, but I don't think they're accepting that name here. It's RCIA still here at our parish, right? So there have been a lot of younger people who did go the route of the world, and somebody helped turn the light switch on in their brains, and it's like, this isn't working. And we've had a lot of those people at our parish jump into Catholicism, and I think they're the better for it. We've got 2 of the RCIA teachers here. In fact, Wade here is he's in charge of the group, and I think that gives us hope. You give us hope. The older of us here, we're lamenting over the last few years about how this culture is kind of going down the tubes a little bit, down the drain. And I thank you for bucking the trend. And it's just so great to see. We have time for maybe a couple of questions. Anybody? Questions for Robert? Paul?
I have two questions, but I'll pick one. You mentioned, I think, a couple of times worldly attachment. Any specific ones that you had to struggle on? Any, or you're just talking about, the regular money, power, whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was money and power. I had definitely a lack of trust in Jesus to the point, where I definitely felt like I kind of needed to, make the money, right? It wasn't so much like God will just provide for me, right? So there was that, but more of sinful attachments, more of kind of, as men, we all have under original sin, we have a kind of a slothfulness, a sensuality, a tendency towards impurity and other things like that, which we have to overcome, right? I mean, so those are the kinds of things, I was struggling with. And there was some trauma that I suffered even as a child, even in my, the home that I had. So, I don't want to, it's more, you can talk about that stuff, but it's kind of like, God's been so good, So anyways, those are, I don't want to go into more detail than that. Yeah. Anyone else?
So a common line of thought outside of the faith is that smart people don't believe in God, and the dummies like us do believe in God. Now, you were obviously raised in an intellectual family. Did you ever, two questions, or twofold question. Number one, did you ever wrestle with the existence of God? And number two, practicing Catholics nowadays have a way of standing out, so we do get challenged out there. And so have you experienced either one or two of those things?
Yeah, so I didn't ever doubt the existence of God. I think there was maybe a very brief time where I kind of had some doubts about whether there was a loving God, a God who died for us. And, I always believed in Christ, Jesus Christ, but very fleeting. So no, in my own spiritual journey, there was never any doubt that God existed. There really was never any doubt even that there was a loving God. The only issue was the lack of kind of my own sinful nature and weakness in living the moral life. So, that has a profound impact on the way that you perceive and understand God, right? So as I've gotten to know him better, my knowledge and understanding of him has grown. But yeah, so, and then, challenge, sure. The work that I do I work with Paul and Chuck Lemandry and Paul Jonah now, and so I do a lot of religious liberty work. And yes, we that, especially in that area, we're literally fighting the devil, and the people that are his minions. I could tell more stories about things that have happened, but one of the worst things that I had, one of the worst experiences, honestly, has been taking depositions of these doctors that think that mutilating children is okay. These people have their own. I know they have their own traumas, probably from their own childhoods, and they're messed up, but they're old, and they are set in their ways, and they are evil. And just listening, and so yes. But at the same time, I am in a place from my faith where I know everything is in God's hands, and he really does hold all the cards, and everything that he wants to happen does happen, And so I'm at a place in my own life where I do have a very profound trust and faith in him. But, things like making the sign of the cross at when you're out in public or at the restaurant or whatever, there were hesitancies, when I would never hesitate now, but there were times in my life where I might hesitate to do that, or, I don't know. So, there's more I could say, but.
Thank you so much. I just brief question: how strong of an interest did you have of going to St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the 6 contenders. I mean, I visited. I visited all 6 of them. Very nice. So yeah. No, it's like in a bowl, kind of, right? The weather there is, from what I've heard. But no. I mean, when I visited Dallas, it was like, that's the school for me. It was very simple. The other ones weren't really that significant. But I'll just close with a final thing, that when Boris asked me to come, and I was kind of starting to prepare a little bit, I was like, what am I going to say? Like, I'm still young again. I don't know. I don't have a lot of life experience. I have some, but not a lot. And what am I going to tell everybody? And the thought that came to me was, well, you can share a kind of hope with people. And so I was really happy to hear you say that that's what I've been able to share, because that is kind of what I was hoping to do. And so if that has happened, then praise be to God.
Let's give Robert a big hand.